We're in Capitola, California with Robert Anton Wilson, who has graciously consented to give us an interview for Enlightenment.com. Let me start with Prometheus Rising, which I have to say was the book of yours that I imprinted most deeply back when I was 23 or so. And in that book, you speak of enlightenment being equivalent to brain change, and you state that when the accumulated facts, gimmicks, tools, techniques, and gadgets of neuroscience, the science of brain change and brain liberation, reaches a certain critical mass, we will all be able to free ourselves from these robot cycles. We've been approaching that critical mass for several decades now, and will reach the crossover point in less than 10 years. That was about 20 years ago, so this is an unfair question, but do you still feel we're heading towards something like that?
Yeah, I remain an incorrigible optimist. A lot of my predictions have failed because I made them a little too specific. I have learned the great wisdom of Robert Heinlein, who said it does not pay a prophet to be too specific. However, some flowers just grew out of the head of a statue of Kuan Yin in Korea yesterday, and is being accepted as a miracle by Buddhists all over Korea who are flocking to the site. They say it indicates a new Buddha is about to arrive. So I'm not the only incorrigible optimist around.
No, you're not, and you've actually helped a lot of people learn how to be more optimistic and get more into their own ability to change their brain and liberate themselves.
Well, the way I look at it, the pessimists lead dreary lives. As a matter of fact, they're not only uncomfortable most of the time, they try to make everybody else uncomfortable. And I can't cite the source, but I have it somewhere in my computer. There was a study that showed optimists outlive pessimists by 19%. Now, why the hell does anybody want to be a pessimist when that means it's going to shorten their lives? It's a gloomy philosophy, and it makes for miserable, short lives. I prefer to be optimistic and cheerful and stay high.
And when you say stay high, you're talking about everything from just positive self-talk and self-hypnosis to doing actual practices, to what you eat, or what do you mean?
Everything. I have tried virtually every consciousness altering technique to some extent. The one I liked least was the Lilly isolation thing. I got quite bored, and then I started getting paranoid.
Did you do
and
that?
I got bored again.
Did you do that with?
No, I was straight. And I found, I decided there must be something in it. So many people get so much out of it, but it's not my thing. You got to find what's good for you, not what works for other people. The isolation tanks didn't do a damn thing to me except make me bored and wildly paranoid. Well, I got paranoid about, how to get paranoid about something to stave off the boredom. I got paranoid about the thought the whole house might be on fire, and I'm down here and I don't know it. This was in a friend's house and had an isolation tank. Of course, that mechanism whereby you substitute fear for boredom, that's one of the most common traps people fall into. They'd rather have any emotion than boredom. And it's easier to think of miserable things than happy things. Especially when you're floating in the dark and you can't, oh well. I don't like isolation tanks. I'm not against anybody who gets anything good out of them. Hooray for them. I cheer them on. It's just not my shtick.
So you said you've tried pretty much every possible practice and technique that you could find over the course of your life. What stuck out in your mind as working really well for you?
Well, I'm not going to put them in order from 1 to 10 because it's hard to say. They interact synergetically. They all help one another. General semantics, neuro-linguistic programming, marijuana, LSD, Zen meditation, transcendental meditation, Kabbalistic magic, brain tuning machines, Hatha yoga, which I don't do anymore. And a few others I can't quite remember right now. I've tried just about everything I can think of.
And when someone is kind of new to this world of trying these sorts of things, how would you recommend they go about figuring out what works for them?
I would say they should start with something really down to earth and not too weird. I would tell them, don't start with occult practices. Don't start with Western magic or invoking angels or anything like that. Start with something like general semantics or neurolinguistic programming and work your way out gradually to the wilder shores of consciousness. But people who plunge into, well, let's say, the Golden Dawn system or the Thelemic system, quite often they go quite nuts. They're not ready to deal with the kind of energies and seeming entities that you contact with those methods.
Seeming entities? Are the entities real?
I haven't made up my mind yet.
Really?
Well, it's like T.S. Eliot, famous story about T.S. Eliot. He was on a ship coming back from France to England, and as they approached the white cliffs of Dover, somebody said, they're so beautiful, it's hard to believe they're real. And Eliot said, oh, they're real enough. And a literary critic named Hugh Kenner pointed out, because Eliot said it, we can read it about 5 different ways because we're so used to ambiguity in his poetry, we attribute it to his ordinary speech. They're real enough compared to us. Well, they're real enough? Well, they're real enough. How real do you have to be really real? And that's the way I feel about the entities that you contact through Kabbalistic magic. They're real enough. They're not quite as real as the IRS. Mm-hmm. They're easier to get rid of than the IRS, for instance.
So I've often thought that if I personally were to get interested in, let's say, UFOs and the whole alien world and hang out with some friends on a mountain, and that undoubtedly I would meet real aliens eventually, and I would know that they were real.
Well, they'd be real for you anyway.
So is it true that whatever reality tunnel you choose to go down does become more real for you?
Well, yeah, by definition. What you consider important and real is important and real to you. It may be totally unimportant and unreal to somebody else, but it's important and real to you.
So,
who is the master? You know, there's a riddle. Who is the master who makes this grass green? Who puts the pessimists in a pessimistic world? Who puts the angry people in an angry world? Who puts the happy people in a happy world? Who does make the grass green? Is that too obscure?
No. But I'm just wondering more about real. Like, take, for example, parapsychology. The last book that I read was Dean Radin's The Conscious Universe. And he goes through the latest proofs, and it seems pretty unambiguous that any trained scientific mind, looking at meta-analysis and all of the proofs that have been done, would have to admit something is going on here. There is an actual phenomena that we can measure. And yet, when people don't want to believe that, they still claim that all sorts of psychic phenomena are completely bogus, even though it seems objectively true to me now that they are real.
Well, that's one of the more controversial areas, but that goes on all over the shop in science. Take AIDS, for instance. 97% of the public believes AIDS is caused by the HIV virus. The 3% of dissenters are mostly leading scientists who had good reputations before they started to dissent on that particular issue. And you got to become a molecular biologist in order to carry on an intelligent conversation between the opposing factions there. So all you can do in most cases is make a guess. As for parapsychology, I think the evidence is good enough that something is going on. I tend to connect it with quantum mechanics and Bell's theorem and the basic interconnectedness of all parts of the universe. As a matter of fact, I think the best model of the universe isn't in science at all. It's in Finnegan's Wake. Everything in Finnegan's Wake is connected with everything else, which is sort of the way I see the world operating.
So sort of holographically interpenetrated, or?
That's right. I call Finnegan's Wake hologramic prose. And I think we're living in a hologramic universe.
Which brings us to the whole physics and mysticism movement that's been going on for 30 or 40 years now.
Even longer than that, back in the 1930s when the Swedish court knighted Niels Bohr, he took the yin-yang symbol of the Chinese for his coat of arms.
So before the Dancing Wooly Masters and those sorts of books in the 60s, people were working about trying to connect physics and mysticism even back then?
Well, Schrödinger wrote What is Life in the late